I would like to tell you about a very enlightening psychedelic journey I went on with Salvia 80x extract. The first thing I did was clear my head. I then took a small pinch of the extract, too small to measure precisely, but would estimate 1/6 to 1/7 of a gram. I put it in my water pipe, which is in my opinion the only way to smoke salvia. Next, I took 2 slowly drawn 4 to 5 second hits and held them each for 10 to 15 seconds. The thing about salvia, at least for me, is that it hits as the second hit is being exhaled. After the physical effects start, I have about 20 seconds to get situated before the full psychedelic effects come in. I'll take a moment to describe the physical effects. My body felt much like the fizz on a freshly poured glass of Coke on ice, and much like fizz was slowly dissolving. I consider this the part that must occur before the journey can begin, the dissolving or taking of the physical body by the light beings. I laid back in silent darkness and closed my eyes. Almost immediately, the visuals had started. I saw a caterpillar, though made of hexagonal pieces, except for the head, which was round and possessing cartoon-like facial features, which formed an outward spiral. I realised that this spiral tunnel was my manifest doorway. I began to proceed forward. My first impression was that I would shoot through the spiral like light speed. It was, however, a long journey, at least in my mind. It only took seconds in reality. Once I was through the spiral, I was in a bland, empty room. White walls, wood floor, and a single window, very colonial in style. It then occurred to me that this was the barest and plainest representation of my man-made confines. I could then feel that they wanted me to leave my physical world completely. For though my mind was on a journey, I was still conscious of the fact that I had a body, and some other part of my mind could still feel it. At once, there was a sensation like the rolling of a huge wave. It felt as though they not only wanted to take my body, but the house and everything in it as well. I pleaded with them, not afraid, but just a little unsettled. "You don't have to take the house, you know. I can leave my body on my own." At this point, still in the empty room, I said, "Don't worry, I will go beyond the window. I promise, I will see the river." I know I said this only because I was recording the experience. No sooner had I made the promise that I achieved full astral projection and left my body completely behind. I was transported by the light beings to a large flowing stream, glistening in the sun with oak trees on the banks. I was there for a short time before there was a very smooth transition from the stream to a beautiful sunlit ocean shore where there were trees that I couldn't quite place, but that looked similar to acacias. There was an elf-like being there, standing on the shore. I could see streams like the one before, except smaller and flowing from one and through me and all the things. There came to me, not auditory, but telepathic teachings. The knowledge was not there one moment, then the next it was. I was gaining knowledge exponentially, and being shown that I was nothing in the physical sense, yet in the cosmic soul sense, I was part of everything, and that everything was part of me, and that we are all like this. We just have to reconnect with the realm of enlightenment to realise it, that we are all meant to be one with. After all this was learned, I was abruptly but gently returned to my body. There are physical effects afterwards that last 3 to 5 minutes. It's a bit difficult to move at first, and any motions I do make are shambolic. Let me start this off by saying that I'm rather well versed in drugs. Throughout my life, I have enjoyed pot, mushrooms, acid, MDMA, MDA, opiates, and many types of prescription medication, and finally, and most recently, DMT. I long ago outgrew the stage of taking substances in order to get messed up. I now take substances to expand my consciousness and experience things beyond my normal life. To elaborate a bit more on my situation in life, I am a standard white-collar worker who does IT for a branch of the federal government. For all intents and purposes, I lead a normal life, including a 9-to-5 job. This interferes with the uses of substances for me, because I must be fully mentally aware during my time at work, leaving only Friday and Saturday for experiences. I've taken salvia 4 times before this. The first time was 3 years ago, an unknown brand and strength mixed with pot. It was termed buttfuck marijuana by our group. These experiences were generally very mild, with much more pot than salvia and little to no effects from it. More recently, I've had 3 other trips, one inside the same location as this trip, but during the day, that was rather mild but very interesting. One experience out in the forest where I felt very much at one with nature, and one more where I smoked some salvia given to me by a friend, brand and strength unknown, and felt very stoned, similar to pot, and was very physically impaired, stumbling, walking into doors, etc. To note, my experiences with mushrooms and acid have been interesting, but they've always seemed to be additions to reality. I was still part of the normal world, it just had additions made to it. This Salvia experience was not like that. For a while, I was totally disconnected from the real world, with the exception of music. I did not understand what people had meant when they said it was not a hallucinogen, that it took you to another place, but after this experience, I do. Now, onto the trip. Time, approximately 11 PM. Location, bedroom, lying in a queen-size bed. The other members of my family are asleep in other portions of the house. I turn on the TV and put on a playlist, mostly of the Beatles, and starting with the song Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds off of Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band at a low volume. The TV is at the far end of the room, and at 60 inches, it fills the majority of my view. I put on a pleasing visualization to go with the music and turn off the lights. I pause the music and plan to start it when I'm finished smoking the Salvia. I'm sitting cross-legged in my bed. I smoke one large hit of the Salvia through a bubbler. I hold for approximately 20 seconds and then release. I attempt to take another hit, but as soon as I breathe in the first wisp of smoke, I realise that it is unnecessary. I set the bubbler down and fall back hard into my pillows, reaching for and fumbling with the remote to start the music because I cannot seem to remember how it works. By luck, I hit the play button and the music begins. As I lay back into the pillows, I feel the Salvia gravity that many people seem to experience when taking the substance. I do not remember if I close my eyes, but I feel myself sinking into the bed with my eyes losing focus, and when they regain it, it appears as if I'm on a yellow surface. It looks as though sunflower petals are growing everywhere. Not the whole flower, just the yellow petal. The sky is a vibrant light blue without clouds, and as I look forward, I see a shadow pass over my head. It continues until I am picked up on what appears to be a giant rolling sunflower, although it is somewhat abstract in its appearance. As I am picked up by this flower, I see the yellow surface pulled up with it in a line as the flower rolls, exposing a brown surface that looks somewhat like an abstract form of dirt beneath it. As the giant flower rolled, I went with it. Very slowly, but feeling in my body the force that one feels during takeoff and landing of an aeroplane. As the flower continued to rotate, I remember seeing some form of similar flowers off across an endless land of yellow, rolling slowly just as my flower was. As my flower neared its full rotation, I was headed back towards the ground and had a moment of consciousness of a sort. I wondered what would happen if someone were to come in right now. Normally I can snap myself out of most drug experiences if I need to, but I felt that with Salvia I would not be able to at all. It is odd, I am normally a very paranoid and cautious person, but this was not a scared feeling, just a thought. It was as if someone had told me that their flowers were beginning to sprout for the spring. As the flower continued, it appeared that a person was reaching out to me from the ground in the Salvia world. As the flower rolled over them, they too were pulled up into it. The figure appeared to be a brown-skinned male and friendly. The flower continued to rotate for what seemed like half an hour of real-world time. As the flower completed its second rotation and I passed by the ground and continued upwards on the rotation, I felt my body rising back to the surface as one does in a swimming pool. Not a rush per se, but a gentle motion that pulled me back into reality. As I got closer to the 3 o'clock position, moving counterclockwise, I could see the darkness of my room above me, as if I was being lifted out of a hole in the ground. Once I was back into my bed, I sat up slowly and said, "Wow, that was really weird," and lay back down. At this point the song Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds was coming to an end, meaning my experience had only been around 3 minutes of real world time. I lay in my bed for another few minutes before sitting up and becoming entranced with the Windows Media Player visualizations playing through my Xbox 360 on my TV with the music. I watched these visualizations for a short while before becoming bored of it. As I flipped through them, I found one that I liked and watched it for a while, eventually figuring out I can control the visualization with the Xbox 360 controller, controlling speed and direction as well as twisting. I was entranced with varying visualizations for another 20 or 30 minutes before I began to get tired. I turned off the TV and turned over to go to sleep. I slept very soundly, with no dreams. The next day, I felt perfectly normal, with no noticeable after effects from the Salvia. The day after, however, I was sitting on a desk in an office at work. As two of my co-workers were talking, I began to zone out completely for a minute or two, staring off blankly towards where the corner of the room met the carpet. I've had a few moments in the 3 days since then where I felt very different and slightly clouded in my mind. All in all, I would consider my experience very positive though. I would like to experiment with salvia more, and I'm growing my own plant to connect more of the substance. The experience was amazing, and I would like to duplicate it, but I know that trying too hard will only lessen the experience, and the reason I enjoyed this so much was because I just let the salvia take hold of me completely. When the time feels right again, I'll take more of the salvia and see what else the plant wants to show me. I'll start off with a little bit of information. First, I've been awake for about 24 hours and it's about 8 AM, so my grammar may be terrible at the moment. Second, I've never tried any psychoactive drug before, so this is going to be a completely new experience for me. I like to consider myself a logical and open-minded person. I also strive to expand my mind as much as possible, so this might help explain the reasoning behind my trip. I've heard about salvia for several years now, but I never got around to trying it, mainly due to skepticism. Finally, at the beginning of August, I had a chance to try it. A couple of people I know who are familiar with it decided to get some for me as a going away gift before I went back to school for the year. It was about 9:20 AM as we drove to my friend's house. I have a tendency to get anxious, so I decided it would be best to let a 0.5mg clonazepam melt under my tongue, just to take the edge off a bit. It was about 9:45 when we had packed up the first bowl of 80x purple sticky salvia. Both of my friends were trying to pressure me into taking the first hit, but being as I am, I like to see the effects on others before I try something. My first friend took a drag and passed it to me. Needless to say, I ended up hitting it before I even saw the effects on her. My third friend then took a hit as I held in the smoke. After that, I took the fourth drag, which cashed the bowl. Within a few seconds, I felt a little wavy and spacey from those two hits. I think it was because I didn't hold the smoke in long enough and didn't have the first hit. After that, my friend who had taken the hit after me packed up the rest of the salvia and handed me the bowl. I took the biggest hit I could and held it in for as long as I could. I passed the bowl to her to let her finish it off and waited. I let out the smoke after probably about 30 to 45 seconds of holding it in and waited. It didn't take long for it to kick in, and when it did, it came like a huge wave. At first, I felt like I was being pulled into the chair I was in, and I couldn't quit laughing. I remember trying to talk, but it was so hard to. My voice sounded like I was talking very choppily, and due to this, I became quiet. Immediately after, the visual hallucinations began. The only way I could describe the first one was by this. Imagine graph paper behind you. All the squares are protruding all around me to about arm's length in front of me. They were also orange and yellow. The ones that were behind me were attached to my body. I felt that if I could get to the edge of where the squares stopped, I could get back to reality. I remember thinking the whole time that this couldn't be real, so I struggled for a while to get to the edge, but I would be pulled back into the chair. Eventually, I decided to quit struggling and to calm myself down. I think this happened because as the high set in, I was trying to think logically and clear-headed. After calming myself down, I recalled the squares going away and being able to see the room again. However, in front of me was what looked like to be an opening. The only way I could describe it was being a one-dimensional object that was just large enough for me to fit into. The edges of it were foggy, almost like a portal had been opened up in our known world. Within this portal was a corner of an old room. This library was nothing but bookshelves. They stretched from the floor up. I couldn't see how high they went due to the edge of the portal blocking my view, but every bookshelf was crammed full of old leather-bound books. There were countless ones I could see. Now, even though I couldn't see what these books were about, I understood what this room was. I knew it held all the knowledge of humanity within it. It had writings from the earliest humans to the great philosophers like Plato and Socrates, on up to the knowledge we currently do not know yet. So immediately upon realising what a beautiful place this is, I attempted to go through the portal. I recall being extremely excited and anxious to get my hands on the books. Meanwhile, my two friends were talking up a storm. As they spoke, I could see their voices, which was like grey smoke coming out of them. As I advanced forward, their voices would pull me back into the chair. I tried to fight it as much as possible, but was unable to overpower their voices. I remember getting very, very irritated by this. I wanted to tell them to shut up, but I wasn't able to speak. Eventually, the portal faded away, along with their voices. After that happened, and me relaxing again, everything in the universe suddenly made sense. This part is hard for me to put into words, because it was more of a feeling. I just had a good feeling in me, almost like an X-high kind of good feeling. Everything I looked at gave off a good vibe and was beautiful. At the time, I couldn't even put the situation going on into words. I just knew that everything was making sense to me. Eventually, that feeling faded away due to me staring at the grandfather clock against the wall. As I stared at it, I noticed the hands being in different positions. One moment it was at the current time, another at 8 AM, and another around 11 PM. Yes, PM. I felt like I was truly time travelling. Once I was done feeling like I was time travelling, I looked to my right to see what my two friends were doing. Apparently their highs had faded away and they were playing with the dogs. I remember sitting there looking at one of the two dogs as he gazed back at me. However, it was a very sad look. I could tell this dog was sad. I was able to completely understand him. The closest thing I can relate it to is extrasensory perception, except we weren't talking to one another in any way, physically or mentally. As I stared at the dog, I felt extreme sadness and sympathy come over me. I felt so bad for him, and I knew he was upset due to how they were treating him. They were trying to play with him, but he obviously didn't like it. It was about this time that my trip started going away. I was still hallucinating a bit. The room kept looking like it was being pulled away from me, or I was being pulled away from the rest of it. I sat there observing this while in extremely deep thought. At times, I would close my eyes and my imagination was extremely vivid. I felt like I was watching a movie on the inside of my eyelids, and it was of whatever I wanted it to be. I continued to think for a while, running what I just experienced through my head. The whole time, I hardly said a word. I believed it was about 10:20, if not a bit later at this time. I actually had to look at my phone because, come to find out, the grandfather clock that I thought was working was actually broken. We left within the next 15 minutes to head to lunch. By this time, all the hallucinations had ended. I just felt high, unbalanced and confused. This faded off for the next hour or so. Around 1 to 1:30 PM, these feelings had completely faded away. The rest of the day I felt extremely calm and relaxed, to the point where I ended up taking a 4 to 5 hour nap around 4 PM. After reflecting about after my trip, I realised what the meaning of the Room of Knowledge was. I strive to expand my mind and learn as much as possible. However, I've constantly had people interfering with this in many different ways, whether it's due to being a distraction, i.e. ex-girlfriend, to just not caring when I tried talking to them about different subjects. It made me realise that I had to set my priorities straight, and to continue my quest for more knowledge without allowing people to prevent me from doing so. I wouldn't say I'm dependent on people, but I realise how influential they have been on me lately. After reading a good amount of horror stories about first times for people, I think I'm really lucky I had what I would call an intellectual trip off of 80x. I would like to try thinking about a certain matter over and over again while smoking a salvia, up until the point of tripping. I'm curious if it is possible to set the stage for one's trip.